One of the highlights and screening as the closing night film at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a film called Love in the Walls. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of that film, Samuel Kostevc. Samuel Kostevc, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Peter.
Good to talk to you. This is such an interesting film about a community social housing um, uh, place in Melbourne. What are the origins of this documentary? How did it all come about?
Well, the community housing communities that are featured in the documentary are sort of 10 minutes up the road from me, and I have some close friends that live as a part of those communities as house managers. So they have their full-time accommodation in these social housing communities, and they kind of play that kind of role of um, living alongside people who are experiencing homelessness and kind of complex hardship. So I'd already known about the particular organization that's featured in the documentary, Servants Community Housing. I'd already known about them for a while now through those connections. But the more I just started kind of getting to go around and spend time at these houses and catching up with my friends or who lived there, just those relationships started to quite naturally build over the space of sort of about 12 months, 12 to 18 months. And quite naturally became like being a filmmaker. There's plenty of stories there that kind of came out, and over the course of a couple of years, um, all the kind of residents that are featured in the documentary slowly became, in their own time, comfortable to want to be able to share their own story, and eventually invited the camera into the space.
Oh, how interesting. How easy was it to convince them? As you said, it took a bit of time to get
Yeah.
their permission to film their stories and for other people in the community housing and so on to talk. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. I mean, I think the goal for me wasn't to try and convince any of them to give me their permission. It was, I think over time, they realized that my presence was there, like first and foremost, just to build a relationship with them. And then if at any point they felt like, oh, we've developed this trust where I feel like I can share a part of my story with this camera, they would let me know that. And so I never really at any point tried to convince anybody to share. What they did end up sharing is so immensely vulnerable that I would not have wanted to try and, I guess, coerce that out of anybody. And so what was really interesting is that it just took that time of building that relationship before a camera ever came out. And it was all on their timing, really, and in their kind of, yeah, whenever they were ready and in the way that they wanted to be able to share their story. And when they did it, I think it made it all the more richer of an experience for the film because I guess I kind of just saw my presence there with the camera as being a loudspeaker for their own story when they wanted to share it. And they were also quite aware that, like one of the, I guess the key pillars of the film is this idea of what it looks like when those two different kind of ends of class in Australia combine. People who have a very comfortable house and then those who are unhoused. And the residents were very aware that they were in this unique position in the community housing that they were in, which wasn't like others where they weren't isolated from the rest of society, but rather they were quite heavily immersed in it. And so they shared this level of relationship with the people outside of their social housing buildings that other kind of boarding houses don't often share. And so they were kind of quite aware as well that, oh, there is something unique here, and maybe we should probably start to share a bit of what's happening here and how it's been different to usually everywhere else they've lived their whole life up to that point of coming into kind of contact with service community housing.
Uh-huh. Interesting to hear all that and how I'm glad it all worked out. Tell me about how much production you had behind you and the filming process. Did you have a crew or did you do it all yourself? How did it all work?
Yes, fortunately and unfortunately, just myself up until the last stages of post production. But I don't think I would have wanted to do this film any other way. It's my first sort of exploration into feature documentary world, and I think this was a story that had already naturally came up into my life, and I felt, oh, I feel like I could, as a filmmaker, make this into something longer and more immersive for audiences. So it felt more achievable just to approach it. We had very tiny budget, which was very generously given through different kind of private donations and stuff, just to be able to finance a bit of post production costs and whatnot. But ultimately, it was just a very incredibly organic and intimate filmmaking process of, like how I mentioned, essentially just normal day to day visits with the people shown in the film would turn from being a usual catch up or a coffee or a walk into all of a sudden the camera is coming out, and it would just quite naturally always happen at the exact same time. It was incredibly a very lean filmmaking. Like it wasn't years and years and years of filming and dozens of months of editing. It sort of felt like every moment that the film needed, the camera came out at the right time for it to capture. Very kind of, yeah, like I said, it was just being myself, my camera, and the tripod, and it's a very kind of like Love in the Walls has a very slow, um, quite intentional filmmaking process behind it, where it's sort of the camera just gets set up and left there, so that whatever kind of happens in that frame, it gives space for whoever's in that frame to share in their own time, and that made the filmmaking process very relaxed,
Mm.
very peaceful, and I think very quickly made the camera disappear as much as it feasibly could from the participants in the film. And I think in the when we got to the edit, just made it so much easier for how the story just quickly fell together because
Yeah.
we didn't have many options and we didn't need them either. I think.
Okay, fair enough. I'll ask you about the edit shortly. Tell me
Mm.
about this. Is the place called Servants? This community
Yes,
housing.
so the organization that sets the backdrop of the film is called Servants Community Housing.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And in this house, what's the capacity and how long do people generally stay?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Servants has four properties across the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, namely in kind of Hawthorn Kew area. Um, Three of those houses are kind of shared spaces, but they are predominantly have a lot more males in them. And then they have one which is a safe house for only for women in high risk situations. And yeah, it's interesting. Like they are technically social housing, boarding houses, but they have this. They tend to have a different model in that they have these live-in house managers at each site who that's their accommodation as well, alongside the people who share those houses who are experiencing homelessness. And so usually each house, I think on capacity can have around, because some are smaller, some are bigger, but there's usually always around sort of like I think 20 to 50 people per each house, and it just depends on, I guess, the state of life of the participants there and how long they stay. Some have been there nearly their whole lives, decades, um, and others go through very quickly depending on what they're kind of experiencing in their life. But I think the idea is that if they've come from other social housing organisations or other boarding house experiences into Servants, there's quite a lot more reasons for them to hang around. I think it's what I experienced, and yes, and then they definitely don't feel crowded either, and each house kind of helps. There are those who stay in their rooms a lot, and there are those who are always out and about. They all come out at meal times, 5 o'clock every day. They all come down for dinner together, and there is this really, yeah, quite. Even though you're having a lot of people who are experiencing quite complex hardship in their life, all intersecting at once, they're actually you know, quite calm and peaceful places to be, even though they do have their ups and downs day to day and the different kind of experiences that come in social housing. But they had a very peaceful feel about them. Like I would just I would just rock up unannounced. Over the course of the couple of years I was filming, and oh, who's around? Like who can I chat with? Who's here today? It was yeah, very organic and really quite lovely houses to film in, and the people there as well.
Okay, very interesting to hear all that. That's very good. Yeah, so let's talk about the editing process. Now, you said it wasn't that difficult because it was fairly organic the way that you were filming over a couple of years. But tell me about that because it's a very tightly constructed 1 hour documentary.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed cutting this one together. I originally cut together 25 minutes, and that 25 minutes was the three vignettes of the main characters. So Paul, Marty, and Cam's conversation with the neighbor. So that was kind of like this first real solid 25 minutes of the film that was like, oh, okay, we've got something here. And then it was just building around those kind of three vignettes, the mosaic of what it looks like in these social housing homes, what the kind of little day-to-day moments look like, what the happy moments look like, the heartbreaking moments. And I think it was really great because essentially just being able to shoot it, direct it, and edit it, I was able to just constantly bouncing off of the edit throughout the whole shooting process as well. So essentially just got to the point where it felt like, well, I've got enough. And that usually was the case. It was very, very lean in terms of footage. Like not much at all. The whole film fits on one hard drive for a documentary. That's not a lot of footage at all. But again, it was just I think the serendipitous nature of the way that we were filming and what we captured, and I think the approach that I we kind of as a team agreed on way back before we ever started filming. This is the way we want to approach it. It's slower, it's more methodical. That lends at the edit to coming together way more organically. Not just because this is all we've got, but because what you did get seemed everything felt like the right piece of the puzzle. It never felt like you had too much of this or not enough of that. Because it's just that kind of shooting style just really lent to a really kind of lean and decisive edit that I think really just kind of hopefully feels like for the audience just centers the stories of those participants as honestly as possible.
Sure, sure. No, that's great. Tell me, has everyone who's in the film seen the film, and how have they responded?
Yeah, yeah. I would say probably like about 95% of everybody in the film has had a chance to see themselves on the screen, one way in one shape or form. And they've always been incredibly, I think, just quite grateful for the experience. Um, I don't think many of them haven't really had any experience at all being in front of a camera. And hopefully I've been able to give them a really good first experience for that. But their feedback has just been very thankful to be able to see, I think, the way they've been portrayed, both, a very balanced perspective of their story up on screen. And we're going to I think we'll have everybody there that's on screen in the cinema as well on the closing night to see themselves again if they haven't already. And yeah, it's been really, really exciting to watch them all kind of connect. There's a lot of different communities in the screen, like there's some schools from Melbourne that are featured in the film, and I haven't had a chance to kind of see how they reacted to it yet. But I know usually for students being able to see themselves on the screen, that's quite an exciting thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a huge community around these social housing groups
Mm.
and wider community that all quite closely connect, and they're just very excited to see this kind of story get a bit more of a larger platform for audiences to see.
Excellent to hear that. I was just wondering, Samuel, are there any particular films or filmmakers that might have influenced your approach to this film, Love in the Walls?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I've been a huge fan of a lot of the documentary work from Lance Oppenheim, who made some kind of heaven. It's beautiful, beautiful kind of quite slow, methodical portrait of the Florida Everglades, a kind of retirement village over in America, which did really, really well. And um, just this kind of style of being quite slow and setting up these really composed frames that allow participants to sort of take their time and let action unfold within those frames rather than kind of chasing around. I'd say that was definitely quite a huge influence for me. Yeah, out of the most.
Okay, no, that's fine. What made you decide to title the film Love in the Walls?
Oh man, it's hard trying to title a film. Oh my
Yeah.
god. Yeah, I think that's going to be harder than making the film. I feel like I messed around with names for months and months and months. And I think yeah, the line comes from the CEO of Servants Community Housing. She says it in the film, when they're talking about how they tried to figure out why their organization was working so well in terms of the benefit that it was giving to the residents. And she was talking about how they did studies and figuring out what was going on. And she said she couldn't tangibly figure out what it was, but she reckons that it was down to there being love in the walls. And to me, I I felt like that at least kind of portrayed, well, it did two things, right? It acknowledged the fact that these are still buildings that contain incredibly vulnerable people, and these people have to be confined to these buildings because they have nowhere else to go. And so to me, it was creating more of this duality of, walls aren't inherently bad because these particular walls that are housing this vulnerable cohort of society seem to have quite a lot of love in them that is enabling them to be able to go on this journey of sort of you know um, self-discovery and claiming their own humanity and dignity again, which often just isn't the case that we hear from social housing. And so it's this amazing thing of being able to be like, this title acknowledges the fact that these guys aren't out of this state of life yet. They're still in a place of homelessness. They still have to be confined to these walls in order to be able to have a roof over their heads. But at least these particular walls have this love in them that's quite different to what we're seeing. Yeah, I think so. I think that as a title quite aptly, fitted. It's always like funny you talk about it, like, you shouldn't put something as, bold as love, in a name or something like that. You always feel like sometimes more ambiguous, or I'm just like, oh, but that's all it is, right? It's that kind of simplicity of it. It's both heavy and weighty, but it's very simple and clear, I think,
No,
as
that's
well.
fine. That
Mm.
absolutely fair enough. So tell me, Samuel, you've made other films before, I gather?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mainly work. My main line of work is as a documentary cinematographer. So,
Ah,
in the middle of two other feature documentaries at the moment in production, and yeah, the usual kind of short form documentary and commercial work. So yeah, I've done quite a lot of short documentaries over the last sort of 7 to 8 years. A lot in the kind of asylum seeker immigration space and indigenous space, and a lot of kind of social justice stories similar to Love in the Wall. So I come from a long background of being involved in these spaces, which definitely helped a lot.
okay, no, fair enough. And apart from those two feature documentaries that you're involved with, are you planning your
Mm.
own film, another project very shortly?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I did really love making my own longer form documentary and directing it. It was an incredible experience. The thought of picking up another one terrifies me. Thankfully, I'm busy enough to not have to, I think, feel super worried about having to do that just yet. But I would love to. And there's a lot of stories in Melbourne still that I think I would really love to um, give that longer runtime to, particularly a lot of stories in the asylum seeker space, people who are coming to Australia to build a life here, and a lot of stories that kind of look at that, you know, how do two opposite ends of society coexist? Like to me, that's a real fascinating idea.
Mm.
And I think Australia has so many things, so many themes of that, whether you're looking at Palestinian stories and Israeli stories, or if we're looking at asylum seeker stories and kind of white Australia stories, like these things are, we're all here on the same piece of land and we all have to coexist somehow. And I really, after Love in the Walls, I really feel like documentary filmmaking has such an incredible potential to explore that question of like, how do we coexist? Can we coexist? Like, and how can we do that? So if I was to pick up another film again to direct my own, I'd be looking into pushing into that theme a lot more, I think.
Okay, excellent to hear that. And I was going to ask you about going a bit more political, perhaps, with another film and looking at that sort of dichotomy in society and so on. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
look, I'm not as, it's interesting. Like I'm very human story driven, and so I'd always be trying to look for a way to represent that bigger political story through real, tangible human stories. Yeah, I don't know enough about how politics works to directly, I
Mm.
feel like, engage in arguments and conversations on film. But I feel like more potently than those arguments, you can just sort of show, similar to In Love and the Walls, when you've got Cam and his neighbour, who represent two polar opposites of Australian society, who
Mm.
are able to share a very vulnerable and close relationship. And I think that's sort of like when you can show that, it speaks leaps and bounds. So I'd be interested in being able to show that through even more, I guess, kind of not controversial, but weightier
Right here.
political topics in Australia.
Sure. No, I absolutely understand. That's perfectly fine. Okay, we've been speaking to Samuel Kostevc, the director of Love in the Walls, the closing night film for this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. And Samuel, it's been great talking to you.
Likewise, thank you so much, Peter.
All the best. Bye bye.
Thank you.